Warning to everyone watching us live. I am on Wi-Fi in the lovely Las Vegas MGM Grand. So things are delayed. If I'm all sorts of wonky, apologies. Thankfully, I have the amazing Troy and T to cover for me. So would you guys introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, Becky, and hi, everybody. I'm Tammy Newman with Cyber5. We're a managed cybersecurity and compliance company, and we're here to talk to you today about tabletop testing and incident response plans.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Newman. I'm the CEO at Cyber5, and yes, so we've been operating well since 1999, and our focus in cybersecurity really began in 2014 when the NIST CSF came out, and there was a lot of guidelines there on how to secure an organization, and also just some best practices. So we were looking today to share some of that with y'all and answer any questions. I see our participants growing. It's almost at 50 people now. That's awesome. And Becky's going to save some bandwidth. I don't know if you all caught that on the front end. She is at right of boom, and the hotel Wi-Fi seems exceptionally saturated. So she's turned off her video, so maybe we'll be able to get good audio from Becky here.
Yeah, we'll try, see if it helps at all. Um, Again, apologies to everyone, but Troy and Tammy are amazing experts at this. I've had a lot of conversations with them over the years about the importance of tabletop exercises, and so we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Can we start with our first poll? We're going to ask you guys, are you hosting internal tabletop exercises? Troy, we talked about this previous. Can we talk a bit about scope, what that should look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people get concerned, or where do you start, right? When you're looking at a tabletop exercise, and setting an appropriate scope is important, especially when you're first starting out. Don't bite off more than you really can handle. On a first exercise, I would say scope that smaller, make it something easier to digest for the team, and keep it as simple as possible. And you'll develop from that without a doubt. We were actually just talking about this today, because you can get some great outlines from CISA or NIST, and that can be a massive 20+ page document that just seems daunting, right? You're like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this, but it's really difficult to get it started. You've got some materials Huntress has provided here, and I think they've got a slick, like 1.5 pager outline. That's a great place to start. It'll get you moving in the right direction.
And remember that scoping isn't just the data that you include, but it's the team members that you include. So we run different levels of tabletop testing of incident response plans. Sometimes the tabletop testing that we run is internal. So we're only running our team plus whoever the technical representative is from the client. So that's a very small scoped tabletop test. And we're keeping it internal, focusing on a single point scenario, and then working through that together. And with the same company, then we'll run deeper, broader scope tabletop testing on a less frequent basis. And those tests will involve more of the organization. So instead of just their tech representative from the company, we will also have a representative from each business unit, and we'll also have leadership, the owners, the partners involved. So scoping lets you reduce things or fine tune things to a point that is appropriate for you at that moment, right? And the best thing to do, like Troy said, is just to start with the small scope and get it done. Like just run a tabletop in your own organization, run it with a small scope with a small team, make a really singular point of focus for your scenario, and then work through that. And you can broaden it from there, but just get started.
So we talked a little bit too about the importance of the incident response plan before the table. That why would that be important for someone?
Well, you can't test something you don't have, right? That's kind of the statement. So if you're trying to work through an incident response plan and see whether or not you've included all of the steps in it, or whether you understand how to execute it, or whether your written plan is functional, is executable, you have to have something to work from. You don't know if the directions get you to a destination if you don't have any directions, right? Um, so you have to have some level of plan in order to start at all, in order to test it. That's what you're doing. If you don't have a fully written incident response plan and you have well, this is what we do, like, well, we just do it, right? Not we have it written down anywhere. Have somebody write it down, write an outline. Okay, well, what is it that we just do? And at least get it written down. And then work from there, and it'll give you something to flesh out.
So I'm not sure if my audio is delayed as my video was. So we're gonna try this. Um, so we talked a lot again, Tammy, about starting somewhere, the importance of doing these internally. Is there a team on internally that should be involved in tabletop? Is everybody like where if you're starting, who should be involved in this process?
Sure. So if you're just starting, right, then the important thing for you to do is work with your it is work with your operations leadership and say, okay, so who in operations would respond to an incident? Who owns that responsibility, right? And then get those people on a team to work through an incident response plan. And you can talk to them and say, who's reporting it to you? Like, how are you receiving an incident that says, we're going to initiate the incident response plan? Who's the person responsible for saying, this is an incident and we're going to initiate the IRP? That person needs to be on the team, right? And then the other person that you really need on the team is who's responsible for communication. Who in our organization is responsible for communicating with the client? Who in our organization is responsible for communicating with authorities? So you at least need that core group together, right? Who has the authority to initiate the activation of the plan, the incident response plan? That person has to be on the team, right? Who's responsible for execution inside of the company? Those people need to be on the team. And then who's responsible for communication? At the very least, those people need to be on the team if it's internal. And if you're trying to work it with a client, at the very least, you need who is their tech rep, who from their company would be telling you, right? And that person should be on the team. And that's kind of the smallest scope that you can get, is that group of people.
Yeah, I would contribute here that I think the audience, I think mostly all very technical, engineer background as myself. When I start thinking about a tabletop or incident response plan, my brain directly goes into technical stuff. Like, okay, I've got a machine that just got ransomed or locked down. What are we going to do? And it's easy to look past all the business aspects of it, meaning like communications is absolutely critical, and it's internal and external, right? You got to make sure that internally your team or your response folks understand there is currently a situation that's going on. This is the staff that's working on it, who's on point, and then who's handling the technical aspects, and then carry on that communications internally. But then you also have to relay and communicate outside to the customer. Probably not to the press. We're probably not there, but there might be reason to call insurance. There's a lot of communications that go on. I think for me as an engineer side, I'm easily drawn right into the technical aspects and, oh yeah, don't forget this, don't forget that on, guiding the team on how to resolve it. But man, the communications is really critical. And I think it's not until you go through this exercise that you feel that and you go, wait a minute, were we supposed to call insurance about this? And who do we contact at the customer? Do we even know who that is?
But look, don't let those things be a non-starter too. Like I'm saying, this is the smallest team you can have. And if your response to that is, well, we don't really have somebody who's in charge of communication, so I guess that means we can't do it, that's not a good plan, right? The majority of you who answered that poll said you're not running tabletop tests right now. So where's your non-starter? What is it that says, well, we're not going to do this? Is it, well, we don't have a written plan, so we're not going to do it, or we don't have someone in charge of communication, so we're not going to do it. You can't grow from there if you don't address it, right? So if you just wait until you have everything in line before you start trying, then that's a hindrance to you as an organization. So I'd say, okay, we'll step into it without someone who's assigned to communications. You're going to quickly find out that you need to get somebody in that position, or it's going to fall by default to you as the owner. And that's okay. If you want to own communication, then it falls by default to you. And now you are the person who's responsible with communication, right?
Yeah.
So either way, get yourself started. It's not that difficult, and especially not to do internally.
And so I just put up poll number 2 for you. How often should an MSP host internal tabletop exercises?
Oh, I would say quarterly at least. Yeah. So walk through this with your team just as an exercise. What do we do? What do we do if we get this phone call? What do we do if we get this indicator of compromise? Let them answer the questions, pose it to them directly. How are you going to respond? Get feedback from your team, walk through that incident response and see, what are they uncomfortable with? Where are they afraid to move forward, or where do they feel vulnerable, so that you can address those things. So quarterly is a really good answer to that.
Yeah. And the question was focused on as an MSP. So
Right.
It depending on the business, it's very different too. And there's scenarios you might think, well, wow, what are we going to do quarterly? Well, there's a lot of different scenarios that you could test, and what we do is look at what's the most common current technical threat as being an MSSP. That's what we're focused on as those technical threats. So we're seeing this resurgent in all these help desk scam calls going on now. It's really uncanny how that's come back around to the forefront. And so we had recently walked through an exercise on that because I wanted all the staff and operations, everyone to be aware, hey, this is a current threat that we're seeing again, and how do we handle it? What are all the things that we need to do? So I would say, from a quarterly perspective, might sound like a lot, but for technical, there's always something that we need to be paying attention to. And then outside of that, we do some interesting things for our customers as well. We'll guide them through tabletops, and they're not always technical. One we did recently was regarding social unrest, right? So imagine that there's a protest going on, and you don't have access to your building, right? I mean, certainly that could occur, and then what's the response then for the organization? So there's things you can look at too outside of technical aspects.
And our client ones we do annually. Internal testing, that's part of training our team, and that just becomes internal tabletop testing. That's part of keeping our team on their toes and keeping them well informed and making certain that they feel supported by us, that they know if they have an issue, if they feel vulnerable in some aspect of incident response, they can bring it to us and we can work through it. But with our clients, we do tabletop testing annually. And with some clients, we do different levels of tabletop testing on different years. Sometimes, like I said, that scope is narrower and we're only involving their MSP representative or their internal tech representative. And sometimes it's much deeper and we're involving their whole team.
Yeah.
So are you seeing an increase? Have you to see tabletop exercises being a requirement on cyber applications?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, the question was, are we seeing an increase of requirements through cybersecurity insurance applications? And the answer is absolutely yes. As well, along with that, you have to have an incident response plan. But that is very common throughout all the carriers now. that is definitely a requirement.
Yeah, for every major cybersecurity carrier now, it's part of their request for information. When they send that questionnaire out, it asks if they're tabletop testing. Or actually, it doesn't ask if they're tabletop testing. It asks if they're testing their incident response plan for every single one of the major carriers.
So we talked a bit about some of the requirements that you might see for, is it the SIS 20? Am I remembering that correct?
Yeah, that's one. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And then,
CIS 20 is a great resource for sure.
Mhm.
and then
Um,
you would reference specifically the CSF areas that's required.
that's true. So most contractual requirements or even regional requirements now roll you back to best practice cybersecurity practices. Those are usually represented by a nationally identifiable organization like the CIS 20 or the NIST CSF, right? Those are foundational. And so in each one of those, every foundational resource that you can find, having an incident response plan and testing that incident response plan is actually part of the requirement platform, part of the platform. And the new NIST CSF, RSIM3 talks about the importance of testing and updating the IRP on a regular basis. It doesn't tell you exactly how to test it, but it does tell you that in order to say that you're meeting that part of the framework, you have to be testing it and you have to be making updates based on those tests. And the same goes for the CIS 20 and the same goes for 800, 171. Like in most of the requirement platforms, it is specified. In all of them, it is at least implied.
Yeah.
So what tips or tricks do you have to make this more engaging for internal team and for your customers?
So we do different kinds of challenges with our team, and y'all have some great ones. Huntress has some great ways to work through it in a game format, and there are many different ways that you can work into it. For us, we like to work through scenarios that have happened recently. So scenarios that our team that we've trained on that have been in the news, breaches that have happened, and go look at how did their incident response team respond and how would we respond to a similar incident in our own organization. And it gives them kind of a social context or a business context for it having happened. With our clients, we choose scenarios that are relevant to their vertical, right? Things that, scenarios that they may have heard of other law firms being involved in, or other production facilities being involved in, or other architect firms being involved in, or financial organizations being involved in. So we try to focus their scenario, right, on something that's already familiar to them and they're already engaged and interested in, and then let them work through, well, how does your incident response plan respond to this particular scenario? And usually that works pretty well. The other thing is just getting them engaged. So seeing to it that they have a question, that they have some information ahead of time so they know what's coming. Seeing to it that there are questions that they need to answer and input that they need to give during the tabletop test. So they're not just sitting there watching. They have to be actively engaged and participating, right? And then a follow-up as well. So they get a follow-up questionnaire that lets them answer questions about what happened and what could happen differently. That usually helps too.
Yeah, we were,
And
oh, sorry, Becky, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I just had a recent story from our staff. I mentioned earlier about the help desk scam coming through. And we kind of narrow focused further down on that. And you guys may have experienced this out there in the audience with a malicious screen connect or what's the other one? Autodesk, I can't remember, but an alternative remote control agent dropped onto a machine. And I don't know, the team gets excited about that stuff because it's just, it's a real thing and it could happen. And they want to know, how do we identify it and how do we respond to it and what's the best case? So again, keeping it pertinent for things that are realistic and that really could happen in the organization helps keep them engaged.
And I have to believe in some ways that helps reduce the risk of some muscle memory. Sorry, guys, I dialed in, so I'm hoping this helps the audio a little bit, so that's not so darn delayed.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, all right, we got one of the two working. I took a gamble on hotel Wi-Fi in Las Vegas, and I failed. So your teams are good. You've hired incredibly intelligent individuals, so internally mixing it up so that you have to flex some new skill, test out a different set of skills and specifically when it comes to your process and procedure. There's ways to poke holes in the things you have documented and to find areas for improvement in that. I'm going to go off script a little bit. It's something somebody asked me yesterday, we did a really big tabletop exercise here at Right of Boom yesterday. We actually built out an entire Monopoly style board game to play it, and then did a bit of a panel where people asked some really great questions, and we kind of went down a rabbit hole talking about postmortems. Do you do a postmortem on a tabletop exercise?
Oh yeah, we do. I don't know if everyone does, but we do.
And then are you able to use, oh, go ahead.
You really, you have to. I mean, because you, in the heat of the moment and all that, you're responding and doing what you think, acting in the best interest and doing the things that you think need to get done. But you may not recognize gaps or things that were missed. But we find something every single time that we're like, oh, should have done this better, or this communication didn't go out. I mean, every single time. So, and part of it's documenting the event as it's going on, right? So that communications role also needs to be filling out the incident response document and keeping everything current and updated in there so that when you do that post-mortem, you can look at the documents and go back through it and say, okay, here's what we did, here's how we responded, where were the gaps, what did we miss?
If you're not doing the postmortem, you are missing one of the primary benefit of having done the tabletop, right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to do the tabletop, to recognize some weaknesses, to hear your team be nervous about this, that, or the other. And then if you walk out of the room and don't have any of that captured and don't do any follow-up on that, you didn't really get anywhere. You just added to your anxiety when you go to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Doing the postmortem lets you capture all of that and say, okay, these are the places that, like, hey, we had 3 people say breach in this tabletop test, and we don't say breach. Like, that's not a word that any of them can say. And we need to make certain that we're communicating that to them and that everyone on the team understands. You don't type into a ticket, well, you've had a breach. Like, you don't say that to a client, right? That has to go through the right communication channels, because as soon as you establish something as not an incident that you're responding to, but as a breach of confidentiality or well, there's a whole other issue. And now you're starting a timer on an insurance clock, or you're starting a timer on a response clock. And so anyway, when you have things pop up in a tabletop test, you need to capture them so that you can go back in the postmortem and say, these are the things that we need to do different, or the places where we need to make improvements, and let's talk about that. And that rolls you into the update part of the things that NIST CSF or CIS 20, or even the questionnaires that you get from Chubbs or Beasley or Hiscox, they all say, not just are you testing your plans, and usually they just say plans, they don't say which ones. Are you testing your plans but are you updating them? Right.
Yeah.
Well, you've got to be able to say yes, like we run tests and we make updates based on what we got wrong, right? Or what we could do better.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation yesterday as well around why you can't say breach. It was, and it even went down the path of, but can you say incident? So we were trying to come up with what you could say and what you couldn't say.
Right, right. So we say IOA, and so indicator of attack, and we say IOC, an indicator of compromise, which is a whole different thing to have received an indicator of a compromise, right? Which could be a compromise, could not be, and until you actually define it as having been a compromise, and you may define that compromise as being a breach of confidentiality or a breach of integrity or whatever. You don't start there. So we start with, hey, these things are indicators of an attack. So IOAs on the organization, and these things are indicators of a compromise in the organization, and we're going to work through that and do forensics and investigation and see if there's an actual issue at hand. And those are the terms that our team is familiar with using and what goes into our templates and our tickets. And that keeps things neutral, right? Until you reach a point where there has to be a designation of an actual breach of confidentiality or something like that. But there's only 2 people in our company who can say that, just like there are only a couple of people who can initiate a disaster recovery plan, right? You don't want anyone in the company to say, hey, I think this is bad enough. We're going to kick off our DRP. We're going to pull everybody on to backup data. Like, there are only a couple of people in the organization who can define something as a disaster and initiate a disaster response plan. And that's how it should be. Otherwise, you're looking at some potential chaos there.
That makes sense that not everybody can pull the fire alarm. That
Right.
there's a few people, it's got to escalate through a few things, and that in that moment of panic, everybody wants to do it, but that in this specific example, there's nothing wrong with taking a beat, escalating it first. You could actually do more damage by running into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So in the audience, and the chat has been incredibly quiet, guys, and I wasn't sure if it was me, like if it's the Wi-Fi here or if it's just quiet, but has anybody here had a client request a tabletop exercise, or is this something that you feel like you're offering and nobody's taking you up on it? Hammy, Troy, do you make that a part of your requirement with your customers, or is it one that you offer and hope they take you up on it?
No. So if we manage their compliance and their cybersecurity, then they're going to do a tabletop test with us every year. And the scope of that may be narrowed, like it may only be their technical representative if that's what they want. But I don't have a single client who doesn't at least have some level of cybersecurity insurance, which means I'm answering for them, with them, on that questionnaire that says they're testing and they're updating every year. And so in order for that to be an honest response, they have to actually be testing and updating every year, right? Yeah. What we've tried to get away from is them just handing us those questionnaires and never looking back, right? So I won't complete a questionnaire for a client without them. So whoever my point of contact is at that organization, we sit together in a meeting and complete their insurance questionnaire so that they're well aware of what's covered in their managed cybersecurity agreement and is being implemented, what's a project in order for us to say yes to this, because the risk is theirs to take. Ultimately, they have to submit those questionnaires. The same thing if they're required to have compliance with GDPR or with NIST 800-171 or wherever it is, right? We can help them complete the data, but the risk is theirs if they're saying, I'm doing it, and they refuse to do it, right? So no, it's a requirement that they have to do a tabletop test. It's not a requirement that everyone in their leadership participates, but somebody there's got to participate, and then we roll them. And it's not like a 2-hour engagement. It's not like a huge thing. These can be short, right? You can scope them small. You just have to get them done.
Yep.
That makes sense, though, and it seems to have been the direction of a lot of cybersecurity conversations, is looking at the frameworks and then leveraging the insurance requirements. Insurance requirements can be written off a framework anyway, so there's a lot of overlap there. So using those two and making that kind of the catalyst that can have these conversations. So as you started this, though, how did you make that push? Like, it was just a, hey, we're gonna do this, schedule a time, or did you have it as just a part of your regular QBR agenda? Like, what was the beginning like?
Let's see. Wow, that's way back there. We did, so it varied by client.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Depends, yeah.
We did include these in our QBRs. And I will tell you, when we first started doing tabletop testing, we really only ever did our team initially years ago when we first started this. It was our team internally and their single point of technical contact, right? The single point at the organization that handled their technical decisions. And those were the only people in the tabletop test. So I didn't need much permission. It just went in a monthly meeting. I was like, this is what's on the agenda this month, right? We're going to do a tabletop test of your incident response plan or of your BCP. We're going to walk through an incident together. And I never got any resistance from them, because they're like, cool, I want to know how that's going to work and what y'all are going to do and what I have to do, right? That wasn't a paid engagement.
Right.
So we would just tell them, this is going to be on the agenda for our monthly meeting in May, right? This is what we're going to do. And it's not like they would say, no, we're not going to do that with you, right? They're coming to the meeting anyway. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. It could be difficult.
Yeah,
I think it could be difficult to try to walk in and sell that as its own standalone thing. It's always been included in a comprehensive security implementation for an organization. Like, this is something that's required for your compliance needs or insurance needs, and we'll do one tabletop a year with you. That's included in our service delivery for your monthly payment. If you want to do more, absolutely, we can do more. But we need to at least do one so that we're satisfying what's required.
right. And that's, I mean, we don't have much issue with that. It's a different thing if you're doing a full scope tabletop test and it's a paid engagement. So we're also hired by companies to come in and manage a tabletop test of an incident response plan that we don't manage. That's not ours, right? That's a whole other thing. And then when we do a full scope incident response tabletop that involves the leadership and involves somebody from each department, and it's more like a 2.5-hour engagement, that's a project, right? But those usually are organizations that are really driven by cybersecurity, that really are driven by compliance, and they want to know, what are we going to, they're nervous. They want to know, what are we going to do? What happens if it's me? What happens if it's somebody from my department? How are you going to respond? Who's handling the communication? They want those questions answered, and they want to work through it, and they don't mind paying an engagement to do it. But on the front end, if your question is how we started with it as scope as small as we could scope it, and walking it into a monthly meeting with them.
So that makes sense. It's got to start somewhere. Conversation is starting simple, starting easy. And I have to believe that increases. I mean, people sometimes talk about the stickiness. How do you continue to show value to your customers, your clients, and show that you're more than just the company that makes their computers work? You are their managed services provider, not just the IT guy, for lack of a better term. You're showing some additional value and showing a knowledge of their business mechanisms, how they make money, what's important to them, what their business needs are, not just their IT needs. Now, we talked a bit about some of the deeper ones that you do, the in-person ones that you do. I think it's every 3 years for some of your folks.
Mhm.
What does that entail?
Well, that's a bigger step. So we do have several clients that we do smaller scoped tabletop testing a couple of years in a row, and then pretty much on a 3-year cycle, or really on a 3-year cycle, we'll do a full scoped tabletop test. And that's a much greater commitment from their company, because they're bringing in the principals of their organization to sit in a meeting that's going to be maybe 2.5 hours long, right? Where that's an interactive tabletop test. And that costs them money, whether they're paying me or not, right? And it's also a paid engagement for us, right? So, it's a financial commitment for them to participate in. And those are, we do 3 scenarios, and we will walk through a baseline technical scenario, we'll walk through a social engineering scenario, and then we'll walk through a scenario that's very specific to their vertical. So something that has happened recently to another organization in their vertical, something they've probably heard about. And we have a full set of documentation that goes out ahead of time so that everyone knows what role they're playing when they get in the room. Everyone knows what their responsibilities are as they walk in, what will be expected of them, what their time commitment is. We have someone in who is just there to make certain that everything gets recorded, right? That when I'm leading, or whoever my team lead is, that we don't miss anything, it all gets written down. And then we have a full set of documents that go out after the tabletop test that include pulling their responses to questions back from them and seeing, where they have additional concerns or where they think the services need to be changed or updated. It is an excellent opportunity to spend some real time in front of the principals of the organization to show them what we're doing as a company for them, what services we're providing so we provide retained incident response for those clients as well, because we have a full incident response team at Cyber5. But even if you don't, whatever service it is that you are providing that's part of that incident response, that you want to be certain that you've got it out there and saying, this is what we do. You also want to be certain that you have that shared responsibility matrix, right? No matter how formal or informal you have it written, that you're really communicating, this part is your responsibility in the organization, right? And this part is my responsibility as your MSP. And this part is the responsibility of your retained incident response team, right? You want to clearly define what you are and are not doing for your clients, so that they don't just assume that you're doing all of it, regardless of what's written in their statement of work, right? Because the frequent response, I saw somebody say, we don't answer the questionnaires for our clients, or I don't answer the questionnaire for our client. Well, the issue, if you don't participate in answering the questionnaire with them, is that they hand it to someone and say, answer this, and all the answers need to be yes, right?
Yeah.
And they just roll through and say yes and turn those in without ever really defining, are you doing this for us? Is this part of our contract with you or not, right? So we try to have that conversation. Did that answer your question?
Yes, no, that was perfect. Yes, I do think, you can't fill it out especially when it comes to your insurance forms, you can't fill it out for the client or the customer. We've had insurance specialists on in previous episodes to talk about that, but
Right.
You definitely shouldn't let them fill it out on their own.
Right.
Just because honestly, you're managing their IT. They most likely don't even know what some of those tools
I have
are
no idea.
Right.
that they're answering yes to. They
Yeah.
just think, I'm covered, I'm good. So being a part of that, and then using that again as the way to, hey, we said yes last year and we still haven't done your tabletop. We have to do that before we can say yes again.
Right, or
Um,
understand that if you don't have evidence that it's done and you have a claim with the insurance company, they can deny your claim. Right?
yeah.
Because you've said you're doing something that you're not doing.
Yes, the documentation piece becomes critical. And if you've ever had to deal with insurance on cyber, on your home, on your car,
Yeah.
insurance companies love documentation. And if you don't have every last little bit of it, yeah, you don't get paid.
Right.
And so talk a bit, so we have some resources in the resource section of the webinar before we kind of close out today. Just to give everybody a heads up, the irgame.ai that's in there is an MSP, Bob Miller, out of Louisiana, developed an online version of an IR game that Matt Lee and Ethan Tancredi built. They play it once a month. I think it's around the last day of the month. Highly recommend joining that. And it's free to play. It's about an hour and a half long, but it's definitely for your internal teams. Backdoors and Breaches, another fantastic resource, very technical, but they do have an online card game for that. Your Huntress Hub resources, we built a tabletop exercise called My Ice Cream is Melting. It's about a 15 to 25 minute exercise, super lightweight for you to use with your clients. The whole thing really stems around why you need tools, not what tools you need, but why you need an incident response plan, why you need a communications plan. Highly recommend checking that out. And then, Tammy and Troy, would you walk us through the CISO resources? That is definitely more your area of expertise.
Oh, sure. CISA has a great set of resources if you log into them. They're not resources that are designed for MSPs. So every other resource that you have up here, these are directed to you in your vertical. The
Yeah.
CISA resources are not. They're designed for small to medium businesses across the country, or even they're designed for businesses that are servicing the DIB. But they're excellent resources, and they have whole scenarios written up.
Yeah.
And entire questionnaires written up to go with them, as well as pre-tabletop test documentation to send out and post-tabletop test documentation to send out. You won't be able to use it out of the box the way it comes from CISA the vast majority of the time. You're going to take it and it's all written and it's all designed, and you're going to modify it where you need to modify it to be appropriate for your client. But massive, huge set of different scenarios, and almost as importantly as having that done, all of the documentation that you need before and after to provide to your clients and for you to have on hand. Those are for your big, fully scoped tabletop tests. But at the very least, I recommend you open it up, walk through one of their scenarios on your own, by yourself, sitting at your desk, to see what it looks like from CISA. Because they've done a really good job, and they put new ones in, I don't know, at least once a year. They get new ones in there, maybe even more often than that.
Yeah, definitely click the link, open this, the resources button on here and save all those links. And the CISA one, good job, Becky. You guys linked it straight into where the resources are. I was just double checking. The exercise packages are there, and you can click their cybersecurity scenarios. And it's kind of overwhelming because they break it down by different kind of business sectors. They've got electricity and chemical, financial services.
Great.
It's a lot to look at, but they're killer resources. And just download. It's a document, a docx. Download the document and look at it, and you can make it your own.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Tammy was saying, you probably can't just take this document and walk into your customer and say, "We're going to do this." You're definitely going to want to massage it a little bit and be ready.
What a great resource. And yeah, I think being able to take inspiration from areas and plug it into your own template is perfect.
Yep.
We will make sure that all 4 of those links are included in the follow-up email as well, just so that you all have them in case you didn't get a chance to click on numerous links while we were talking. But Tammy, Troy, thank you so very much for your time and your expertise here. Everyone in the audience, thank you for being patient with my ridiculous Wi-Fi. I always blame Las Vegas, but thank you all so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in March for the next episode of the Fireside Chat.